Hi, this is Perry Marshall, and I want to talk to you about bubbles. I wrote a blog post real recently called Bitcoin Nuclear Winter, and maybe you could call this Bitcoin Nuclear Winter Part 2. And I want to talk to you about where the world has been, where it's going, and the fractal patterns of how nature and the world repeat themselves, because I've been here before. Okay, so I got my first email address in 1995. It was from a local bulletin board service from a guy who lived 2 blocks away. In 1997, almost exactly 20 years ago, I got a job. It was the first job that was really working out as far as sales jobs go. And I was selling industrial hardware to engineers and software for factory automation. And this was parallel to the .com bubble. This was all going on, and our company was raising money during that time, but we weren't a .com. We were an industrial company, which was considered really boring back then. And everything that I'm talking about here has everything to do with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all the crazy stuff that's going on right now. So you really need to pay attention. Here's what happened. So if you look at the NASDAQ, it looks something like this, okay? And the crash was in the early part of 2001, okay? And the peak was around 2000, and the run-up was around 1999. Okay, so this is 95. This is Perry's first email address right here. This is 97. I get this job. Now, this was a very interesting time in the world because just before I got this job, I got introduced to the world of direct marketing and direct response and measuring, results on advertising and all that kind of stuff. And I got really wise about that stuff. And this is right as the internet is just really coming on strong. And when this bubble happened, the .com bubble, it was really hard at that time for sanity to prevail, okay? So what had been going on before this was Madison Avenue, and Madison Avenue was crazy. Madison Avenue was not accountable for results. It wasn't measurable. They didn't track conversions, okay? And to a direct marketer, this was heresy, and I got indoctrinated in direct marketing thinking, which goes back 100 years, and it was a very, very good thing for me to do. Okay, so I'm learning about direct mail and stuff like this, and I remember realizing, hey, wait a minute, a website is just like a letter in the mail. It's just on the web instead of on a piece of paper. And I realized that before anybody actually told me that. Like maybe a year later, people like Dan Kennedy were saying that, but I figured this out. And so I'm reading these marketing gurus applying the stuff to the internet, being one of the early internet guys. Well, I was making money on the internet 2 different ways. I was selling stuff on eBay, and I was actually making a little bit of money, like $300 a month, which at the time was way more than most people were making on the internet. Hardly anybody was making money on the internet. Mostly the internet was sucking money with all these .coms, okay? And it cost billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to build the internet, right? It's not like this money had no place to go. It just took a long time for that investment to pay off and for the actual services and everything to mature, okay? But, so I'm selling stuff on eBay on the side, and I have this job where I'm selling industrial hardware and software to engineers who are using the internet. They would do all their research online, and then they would pick up the phone or they would send in a purchase order and they would buy something. And I was actually making a living on the internet in 97, 98, 99, 2000. And it was a real living, and we were selling real products and real services that really actually helped real companies. It was business to business. It was serious. And it was not a .com bubble. But we had to raise money in the middle of this. And there was all this .com insanity going on. And I'm pitching investors. I didn't mostly do that. Mostly other people did that. But I was involved in all of it because we were in a tiny little company. And so I got this real dose of sanity. And every dollar you put out had to come back with friends attached in 90 days or less. Otherwise, you get fired. So the race was on. It was very intense. Okay. All right. So you get this huge run up, right? And then what happens is all the money flowing in can't produce a return of an actual practical result fast enough to return back to the investors. And so then all of a sudden, and I mean, this thing fell fast. This was the spring of 2001, and it was bad. Okay. And a lot of people kind of forget that there was about a year or two here where there was all kinds of programmers and webmasters and people all over the place, people in all kinds of tech industries. They couldn't find a job to save their life, and they had to go back to pouring coffee or bussing tables or whatever. I mean, it was really miserable. And everybody was very disillusioned about the internet, okay? And I think it's very, very significant that in 2002, spring of 2002, is when Google AdWords in its current form came out, okay? And it was the first real, actual, sane domestication of the internet. It was the taming of the Wild West, and you could put $1 in and get $2 out. Okay, and it was great. And I thought, and because I had kind of followed this sane path, and not done the bubble, but I was actually making a living with like real transactions. Then I had watched both the sanity and the insanity happen. And so then what happened after this is the internet took off like a rocket. And I'm telling you, this was a magic carpet ride. It was. And actually it started about 2003, okay? Which is exactly, I mean, I couldn't have published the definitive guide to Google AdWords, which is now Ultimate Guide to Google AdWords, and the world's best-selling book on internet advertising. I couldn't have put that book out at a more opportune time. It was just like the perfect time, call it Providence or whatever, I'm telling you. And then I rode this magic carpet ride all the way up, and then I watched the real internet get built and the real businesses, you know, and now I know people that are billionaires from this, okay? And so very big deal, all right? And I was immersed in all of it. It's in my bones, it's in my muscle memory, because I know exactly what happened here, okay? And I lived through it. Well, so in 2013, about 4 years ago, I put out some newsletters and I talked about Bitcoin, and I said, this is eventually going to be the de facto world currency. Why? Because you can't cheat it. And because it has all these advantages of being borderless and everything, this is eventually going to happen. This is a star currency in star principle, where number one, in a growing market, you totally dominate the marketplace and nobody can compete with you, especially if you have network effect. Okay, network effect is what Facebook has, it's what Yelp has, it's what Google has, it's what Uber has, it's what eBay has, which is when you get the buyers and the sellers attract more buyers, the buyers attract more sellers, the drivers attract more riders, the riders attract more drivers, and then you can get an Uber in 3 minutes, and anybody starting another ride-sharing company would be just hopelessly hosed because they could never get enough drivers or enough riders to ever compete with it, okay? And so this is how online companies, this is the most powerful force in the 21st century now, which is network effect. Well, with Bitcoin, you have the number one currency in a growing currency market, and it has network effect. There's all of these little feedback loops, which will eventually suck everybody in. Okay, now you're seeing the first suck happen right now in this bubble that we're in, is people get sucked into it, kind of like people got sucked into using an email address in 1998. Okay, it's like, well, everybody's talking about it, and but what happened with email and with social media is, well, if you want to talk to your friends, you have to use them. And so everybody ends up using them. Well, that's going to happen with Bitcoin. There's going to be all these other things that come into play.